Black Widow Blues, written by Andrew Adams and narrated by Chadwick Polson. Chapter 1. Kimberly slowly approaches the foreboding building with heavy, dragging feet and stops at the door, sighing deeply upon gazing at her own murky reflection in the glass. This is a day she has been dreading for far too long, now finally coming home to roost. She checks her watch one more time to see that she is still 5 minutes early, though never one to be late for prior commitments, pushes through the discomfort and walks inside anyway. The lobby is dark and grim, exactly the type of atmosphere she had been expecting tonight. There is a large security desk that appears to have been out of use for quite some time now, although even a dozen armed guards couldn't save her from what she is about to do to herself. Sickly white light resembling a hospital hallway beckons coldly from an open door. That is the hell she must enter. Several people have already sat down while others grab undoubtedly stale donuts and bad coffee towards the back of the room. Kim wasn't sure how many people she thought would show up, but the small crowd makes her feel even worse. Many of them stare forward like the barely living dead, while only a few turn and gaze at her blankly before facing frontward again. This is going to be an absolute nightmare, she thinks, taking a seat in the back row while avoiding any further eye contact. If that coffee tastes even half as bad as it smells, they are all in for a rough night ahead. 3 minutes remain and Kim begins to feel the urge to stand up and bolt from the room and pick up the pieces another day. No. She has prepared for too long to not at least make a solid attempt toward the goal this evening. 1 more minute. Everyone else in the room is so frightfully odd-looking, though they have all begun to ignore her now. She can't help but notice the woman sitting in front of her has a rather large bald spot on her crown, which she reaches back and scratches as if the thought was spoken out loud instead of internally. Or maybe Kimberly's awareness is unbearably heightened because she is in a strange place surrounded by even stranger people, and nothing seems quite normal at the moment. More attendees continue to pack the room as tightly as her throat is beginning to feel. A plain-looking middle-aged woman walks up to the podium and clears her throat awkwardly into the microphone. Hello, everybody. We are going to get started now so that everyone can get home on time tonight. In case any of you out there are unaware, my name is Sheila, and I am your secretary. Welcome to another weekly meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. The seated audience members begin to clap apathetically and Kimberly follows suit, not wanting to appear out of place as the new girl. Thank you all. I would like to start with a moment of silence before we begin in full. Rows of haggard faces bow to stare at the floor like a wave rolling over the crowd. Kimberly once again copies the rest and lowers her head as the hall falls silent. She holds the position for several seconds but opens one eye and looks around the room again. She doesn't know why she expected something significant to happen during a moment of silence. Excellent. Sheila continues with a grin. I have noticed only one new member joining us tonight, and she is sitting in the back row behind Gina. Would you care to stand up and share with the group? Kim is mortified. She makes an attempt to stand, but her nervous sweat had already begun to dry and her skinny arms peel from the back of the chair with an audible ripping sound. Her palms begin to gush, and the bright lights overhead radiate to reveal rows of overly inquisitive faces turning to investigate. What did you think would happen, Kim? She stands at last with both legs and feet tingling, taking a step into the aisle with half a mind to sprint back to her car and flee. Sheila steps aside from the podium to make room, smiling wide and nodding energetically to encourage their newest member forward. Kimberly finally arrives at the steps and takes each one like a separate mountain to climb before revealing herself to a horde of strangers. She has never been one to lower her walls, and now she is preparing to voluntarily let dozens of people in on her darkest secrets. But it must be done. Hello, my name is Kimberly, and I'm addicted to eating spiders. Gasps and groans roll through the rows and crescendo at the front of the room. Sheila grimaces next to her and takes an unusually long and hard blink. This is everything she feared now coming true. Her manifested visions of a failed recovery erupting upon launch and never gaining any traction. She is doomed. Hi, Kimberly. Several of them respond at last, sounding more like a droning eulogy than a warm welcome. Kimberly, dear, you do know this is an NA meeting, right? Narcotics? Sheila approaches gingerly. We do not judge here and all are welcome, but I just want you to be aware. Thank you, although I am sure you can sympathize with how difficult it has been for me to find a proper support group. This is the first time I have ever uttered these words aloud to anyone, and it is to a group of complete strangers. Here it is again. I am hopelessly devoted to the pleasure I derive from ingesting arachnids. A handful of chuckles join the fold this time, while someone suppresses a gag. Kim stares at the crowd, now from a position of empowerment, and feels the sensation of warm relief stretch across her body. Who cares what a bunch of drug addicts think about her predilection? Why should one be seen as above the other? Do you eat them dead or alive? Someone shouts from several rows back. I have already warned you before about mocking our speakers, Richard. Sheila scowls. That's quite all right. I don't mind. I've been dying to get this off my chest for a long time now. I eat them alive, of course. Dead spiders sound repulsive, all curled up and lifeless, swallowing them dry and crunchy. I love the feeling when they scurry around in my mouth. I can't get enough of the tickle in my throat as all 8 of their legs claw for escape all the way down. More groans. The woman who nearly gagged before runs from the room with her mouth covered. Sheila stands by, nervously fidgeting her hands in different positions and not knowing how to proceed. Do they ever bite the inside of your mouth? The woman with the bald spot asks between drags of a cigarette. Sometimes, yes. Although spiders aren't aggressive creatures by nature, not like us. They only bite when they're hungry or directly threatened. While I'm being completely honest, the bite is exciting. It reminds me I'm eating a live animal and that it's going to become a part of me. There was a brave spider once that hung on to my tonsil as I swallowed and crawled up my nasal cavity. I blew it out of my nose, still alive. Sheila has one arm crossed over her chest and the other covering her face in disgust. Kimberly feels more and more comfortable every time the room recoils. Is there any spiders you don't like to eat? Or one you still haven't tried? Richard asks. None that I don't like, no. I'm sure there are many exotic spiders around the world that I have not had the opportunity to eat yet, but there is only one on my bucket list. The Black Widow, or Latrodicus hesperus. I have not been brave enough to try one yet because a bite going down will seal my airways and certainly be fatal. I will have to do it right and properly prepare both the spider and myself before that happens, for they are smarter than you might think. But alas, even if it should be the death of me, I will one day eat a black widow spider." They fall silent and stare in their respective directions as Kimberly revels in her position at the podium. The excitement she feels having faced her fears compares favorably to the high of the tingling and scratching of spider legs running around the inside of her belly. "How did you discover you love eating spiders?" Sheila asks, giving in to her own morbid curiosity. "I'm sorry to pry, but it is not a typical addiction that we hear about here." "That's quite all right. I began eating them after a case of survivor's guilt, and no, I don't want to explain right now." Sheila closes her mouth and steps back, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I have a question." A young woman stands from the back row by where Kim was seated before, though she was too preoccupied at the time to notice her. She looks more annoyed than disgusted. "Why do you want to quit this habit if you seem to enjoy it so much?" "I don't mean to be rude, but most of us here have to argue with ourselves every second of every day that it really is better to keep living than turn back to drugs. Most of us have spent a lot of time believing that an early death is preferable to longevity and sobriety." "Oh, but I am dying. My addiction has spiraled out of control, and I now eat nothing but arachnids. It's just about the only thing I can stomach. Speaking of my stomach, I have already been treated for internal bleeding, multiple ulcers, and eating disorders, but the doctors can't figure it out. I wasn't brave enough to tell them. The aforementioned biting occurs as their spider senses warn them of an imminent death beginning in my esophagus, and it would appear their exoskeletons protect them from the acids long enough to chew partially through my stomach lining. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Of course not. How could you? You couldn't have known of the despair and anguish that forced me to finally walk in here tonight after a dozen failed attempts to do so. You couldn't have known my backstory, addictive personality, and past traumas that led me to make unwise decisions. And you definitely couldn't have known that I will not stop this compulsion until I aggressively seek help, or it kills me, whichever comes first. That black widow is calling my name, and I likely won't walk away from the experience. Although, even if I do, I know that I will continue to push my boundaries and try for larger arachnids eventually." The crowd has fallen deathly reticent as they gaze forward with bulging eyes and pursed lips. Every naysayer now rests with their accusatory claims of falsehood silenced. The meeting utterly derailed by an outsider who arrived out of nowhere to flip them on their heads. "So, any more questions?" Kimberly asks with her heart still pumping hard, trapped somewhere in the realm between ecstasy and total chaos.